P. Preston Hale adjusted his cufflinks, looked straight at Zuri across that glittering ballroom, and laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an awkward laugh, a deliberate one, loud enough to turn heads, cruel enough to cut bone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, spreading his arms like he was about to give a toast, "meet the woman who actually believed a man like me would marry that." The laughter rippled through Manhattan's finest like a cold wind. Zuri stood perfectly still in her emerald gown, 37 years old, a Brooklyn girl surrounded by people who had never once needed a library, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years. That old familiar shrinking. Then the ballroom went quiet. Not politely quiet. Dangerously quiet. And a man she had kept secret for 14 months walked through that silence like he owned every inch of it. If this story already has your heart racing, stay with me. Hit that subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And don't forget to like. It helps more than you know. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened in that ballroom, you need to understand the woman standing in the middle of it. Zuri Ellington had learned very early in life that the world had a specific idea of what a woman like her was supposed to want. Not too much. Not too loudly. Certainly not in rooms like this one. She had grown up in Flatbush, Brooklyn, in a row house that smelled permanently of her grandmother's cedar closet and the particular mustiness of paperback novels stacked 3 deep on every available surface. Her grandmother, May, had been a reader the way some people are believers, with total conviction and absolutely no apology. May had told Zuri once, when Zuri was maybe 9 years old and crying because a boy at school had called her big and boring, that words on a page never looked at your body before deciding whether you deserved them. Zuri had held on to that sentence for 28 years. She had done everything she was supposed to do. She had studied hard at Brooklyn College, earned a master's in library science from Pratt, and spent 15 years building the Ellington Foundation for Literacy from a single after-school program in a Crown Heights church basement into something that now served over 40,000 underserved New Yorkers every year. She had 42 employees, 3 dedicated board members, and a waiting list of schools begging for her mobile reading program. She had also, at one point in her life, believed she was loved. Preston Hale had come into her life the way certain beautiful and dangerous things do. Sideways, when she wasn't looking. They had met at a fundraising dinner 4 years ago. He was handsome in that Wall Street way that photographs well and ages into something vaguely sinister. He had sat beside her at dinner, ignored the woman to his left who was clearly more his social bracket, and spent the entire evening asking Zuri questions about her foundation with what seemed like genuine curiosity. She had been careful. She had not let herself fall quickly. She had fallen anyway. 18 months in, he proposed. She said yes. She told her mother. She picked a venue. Then, 7 months before the wedding, she found out through a mutual acquaintance, not even directly, not even kindly, that Preston had been telling people the engagement was complicated, that he had been seen at a restaurant in the West Village with a woman named Camille who was thin and blonde and worked in finance and who apparently did not complicate anything at all. Zuri had ended the engagement the same evening she found out. She had not cried in front of him. She had returned the ring by certified mail with no note. She had gone home, sat on the edge of her grandmother's old reading chair, and stayed there for a very long time. She had not collapsed, but she had cracked. And the problem with cracks, she had learned, was that they never fully disappear. They just get covered over by whatever you build on top of them. What Zuri built on top of hers was work. She expanded the foundation. She opened 2 new library branches in neighborhoods that hadn't had dedicated reading spaces in over a decade. She hired 4 new staff members. She wrote a grant proposal so airtight it made a federal evaluator call her personally to say he'd never seen anything like it. She did not date. She did not explain herself. She got up every morning, went to the library on Nostrand Avenue, and reminded herself that she was somebody. Not because a man had told her so, but because the 42,000 people her foundation served had made her someone worth being. That was how she lived for 2 years. That was also, as it turned out, not the whole story. The night she met Luciano DeLuca was not a night she had meant to be memorable. It was a Tuesday in October, which is never a romantic month in New York, no matter what movies suggest. And Zuri had stayed late at the Nostrand branch trying to fix a problem with the donation database that their IT coordinator had spectacularly failed to resolve before leaving early for a dentist appointment. By 9 o'clock, she had fixed the database, eaten a granola bar for dinner, and realized she had left her umbrella at the office 2 blocks over. She went back for it. That decision, an umbrella, of all things, was the pivot point. The rain was coming down hard when she turned the corner onto Fulton Street and nearly walked directly into the middle of something she understood immediately she was not supposed to see. 3 men, an alley, a 4th man on his knees. She froze. In the movies, this is where someone screams or runs. In real life, when a 35-year-old woman from Brooklyn suddenly finds herself 15 feet from a scene that her body identifies as deeply, chemically wrong, she does neither of those things. She goes absolutely still and stops breathing. The man standing with his back to her was tall, dark-suited, and spoke in a voice so quiet that the rain almost swallowed it. "You made a choice," he said. "Now you live with it." He turned before she could move, and for one long, terrible second, Zuri Ellington and Luciano DeLuca looked directly at each other. His face was not what she expected. She hadn't had time to form an expectation, but if she had, she wouldn't have landed on this. Sharp features, maybe 45, with the kind of stillness that isn't peace but something that has learned to look like it. Dark eyes that assessed her in the exact amount of time it takes to exhale. He said nothing to her. He made a small gesture with his right hand. One of his men stepped sideways, blocking her view of the alley entirely. "Miss," Luciano said, and his voice had shifted somehow. Quieter, more careful, the way you talk to someone you're trying not to frighten. "You should go home." It was not a threat. She was almost certain it was not a threat. She went home. She told herself for approximately a week that she had imagined most of it, that it was a fight she'd stumbled on, that it was nothing, that New York at night is full of nothing. Then he found her. Not at the library. Later, she would understand this was deliberate, that he had done his research before he ever appeared in front of her again, and that research included knowing what made her feel safe. He came to a community board meeting she ran in Crown Heights, walked in 10 minutes before it ended, and sat in the back row like a man who had every right to be there. When everyone else had left, he walked up to her while she was folding chairs and said, "I owe you an apology." Zuri kept folding the chair. "For what exactly?" "For frightening you. You didn't frighten me." "You went very still," he said. "People go still when they're frightened." She set the chair down and looked at him. "People also go still when they're deciding whether to run." Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite amusement, more like recognition. "Did you decide to run?" he asked. "I'm still here," she said. That was the beginning. She would never be able to explain it to someone who hadn't felt it. The particular dangerous gravity of a man who had learned very thoroughly not to lie, even about uncomfortable things. Luciano did not tell her, in those early weeks, that he was a good man or a safe man or any kind of man she should attach herself to. He told her what he actually was with a clarity that was almost brutal, and then he waited to see what she would do with that information. She did not run. She did not pretend she wasn't afraid. She asked questions instead. That was her nature, the librarian's instinct, the habit of a woman who believed that information, even the uncomfortable kind, was always better than comfortable ignorance. What he told her was this: he had inherited a criminal organization from his father when he was 26 years old, in a situation that left him no clean exit and several dangerous enemies. He had spent the last 18 years trying to be a different kind of leader than his father. Not a good man, he didn't claim that, but a more careful one, a more deliberate one. He had rules he kept, lines he didn't cross, people inside his organization who had families and children whom he had never once put in unnecessary danger. "You're trying to make yourself sound better than you are," Zuri told him. "No," he said. "I'm trying to be accurate." She believed him, not naively. She was not a naive woman. She believed him the way you believe a structural survey of a building that has cracks in the foundation. It tells you what you're working with, and you decide from there. They spent 4 months like that. Careful, circling, neither of them willing to call it what it was. Then one evening in February, sitting in a booth at a Haitian restaurant in Flatbush that Zuri had been going to since she was 12 years old, Luciano looked at her across the table and said, "I would like to keep seeing you, but I need you to understand what that means." "Tell me what it means," she said. "It means that certain people cannot know you exist. It means that for your protection, and I am serious about this, you will need to agree to a level of discretion that most people would find unreasonable." Zuri was quiet for a moment. The restaurant was loud around them, cheerful and ordinary, and she looked at this complicated, guarded, unexpectedly honest man across from her and thought about what Preston Hale had done with her heart the last time she'd given it to someone. "And you?" she asked. "What do you have to give up?" Luciano looked at her steadily. "Whatever you ask." She asked for honesty. She asked to always be told the truth, even when it was the kind of truth that was hard to hold. She asked that he never use her foundation or the people she served as leverage or cover for anything he did. He agreed to all three without hesitation. They were married 6 months later in a private ceremony with 2 witnesses, Zuri's closest friend, Donna, who spent the entire event alternating between crying and hissing, "Zuri, do you know who this man is?" into her ear, and Luciano's attorney, who looked like a man who had witnessed stranger things and had long ago made peace with that. For 14 months, Zuri DeLuca lived a double life that she had not entirely chosen, but had not entirely rejected either. She went to work at the library, she ran her foundation. She visited her mother in Crown Heights on Sunday evenings and deflected questions about her love life with practiced skill. She was Zuri Ellington to the world. She was Zuri DeLuca at home. At home, she was someone Luciano looked at like she was the most solid thing in his life. Not the most beautiful thing, not the most convenient thing, but solid in a way that he, who moved through a world of people who were always performing something, found almost impossible to look away from. She was not perfect at any of this. She had moments of doubt that were not small. She had nights she lay awake in the dark asking herself whether the woman she was building, the librarian, the advocate, the foundation director, could possibly coexist with the reality of what her husband was. She got angry sometimes in ways she couldn't explain to him, because to explain them fully would require dismantling the entire arrangement, and she wasn't ready to do that. She was human and conflicted and tired in ways she didn't always have words for. But she also knew, in the marrow of whatever is truest in a person, that what Luciano felt for her was not performance. That was the thing that kept her anchored when everything else tilted. She did not expect the gala. She had agreed to attend the Meridian Foundation's annual charity event as a representative of her own foundation. It was a networking opportunity, important and fairly straightforward, the kind of thing she had done a dozen times. She wore the emerald gown because her assistant had picked it and because it made her feel like herself, which is the only reason a woman should wear any dress. She was standing near the bar with a glass of sparkling water when she heard him. She didn't have to look to know. The voice was a calibrated public weapon she had once known intimately, and it hadn't changed. "Zuri Ellington," Preston Hale said loudly, in the tone of a man who has rehearsed his cruelty, "I heard your little library charity was invited tonight. Good for all of you." The people around them heard the sneer wrapped in those last 3 words. Some turned away. Some watched. "Preston," she said, and her voice was level. She had practiced being level for 37 years. "I'll give you credit," he continued, cutting across whatever she might have said next. "You put on a brave face. You always did." He looked her up and down once, the way you appraise something you're about to reject. "Tell me, how many successful men have come knocking since we parted ways?" She said nothing. "That's what I thought," he said, and then he raised his voice deliberately, unmistakably, so the people around them could hear. "Because, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, there is a very specific kind of woman that no man with options ever actually chooses, and she is standing right here." The laughter came. Not everyone, but enough, and Zuri felt it, that specific old wound that never quite healed, opening again in a room full of people who would never understand what it costs a woman like her just to walk into a room like this one and not apologize for existing. She was not going to let herself cry. She was absolutely certain of that. But she was also not sure she could speak without her voice doing something she would regret. And so she stood there in that half second of terrible silence that precedes humiliation completing itself. And the room changed. It didn't happen loudly. That was the thing that would stay with her later, the detail that seemed most impossible. It happened quietly. A stillness moving through the crowd the way weather moves, people turning without knowing quite why, conversations dropping away like lights going out in sequence. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. Not hurried, deliberate in the way that only a man who has never once needed to rush can be deliberate. Luciano DeLuca walked through the crowd, and the crowd moved for him without being asked. He came directly to her. He took her hand, and he raised it to his lips with the kind of unhurried care that communicates something words cannot, in front of the entire ballroom, in front of Preston Hale's suddenly ashen face, in front of Manhattan's finest who were holding their collective breath. "No one," Luciano said, his voice carrying to every corner of that room, without ever rising above a conversational level, "speaks to my wife like that." The silence that followed was an absolute. Preston Hale opened his mouth, and then, for what appeared to be the first time in his life, he closed it again. Zuri looked at her husband. This man she had kept secret, this man who had kept her secret, this complicated and dangerous and unexpectedly devoted man, and she felt something shift inside her chest. Not relief, exactly. Not triumph. Something older than both of those. Something that felt, for the first time in a long time, like being truly, unambiguously, publicly claimed. And the room, Manhattan's finest and most carefully constructed social machine, recalibrated itself around a new reality. Zuri DeLuca existed, and her husband had just told the city so. The ballroom did not return to normal. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward, but everyone remembered that the Meridian Foundation's annual gala, which had survived scandals and market crashes, and one genuinely catastrophic incident involving a senator and a shrimp cocktail in 2019, did not simply shake itself off and resume. It stayed changed. The orchestra, which had been playing something forgettable in the background, stopped. The waitstaff with their trays of champagne flutes paused mid-step. The 312 people in that room held themselves in a collective suspension that had nothing to do with good manners and everything to do with the particular animal instinct that fires when a genuinely dangerous thing has just revealed itself in your vicinity. Preston Hale stood 6 feet away from Luciano DeLuca and looked for the first time in his adult life, like a man who understood that he had made a serious miscalculation. His face went through several things in quick succession. Disbelief first, the genuine blinking kind that a person can't manufacture. Then a fast, visible recalibration as his brain caught up with what his ears had just processed. Then something that wasn't quite fear, but was fear's first cousin, the kind that shows up in the jaw before the rest of the body has agreed to feel it. "I'm sorry," Preston said, and the words came out wrong. Too fast, too flat, stripped of the social lubrication he normally applied to everything he said. "I wasn't aware that Zuri was—" "I know you weren't," Luciano said. That was all. 3 words, no elevation in tone, no visible anger, just a statement of fact delivered by a man who had clearly decided that Preston Hale did not require any further attention this evening, and who turned away from him with a finality that was somehow more devastating than anything louder could have been. He turned to Zuri. And here was the thing about Luciano DeLuca in that moment that Zuri would think about later when she was alone and the adrenaline had finally metabolized. He did not look triumphant. He did not look like a man who had just won something. He looked like a man checking to see whether someone he cared about had been hurt, which was a different thing entirely and a more complicated one. "You okay?" he said quietly, just to her. She looked at him and felt anger and relief and something that had no clean name moving through her in the same instant. "We need to talk," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "We do." He guided her toward the edge of the room with one hand just barely touching the small of her back. Not possessive, not performative, just present. And Zuri was aware of every set of eyes in that ballroom tracking them. She kept her chin level. She had spent her entire adult life learning to move through rooms that weren't built for her with her chin level, and she was not going to stop now. They found a corridor off the main hall, lined with catering carts, and the particular institutional fluorescent hum that exists behind every elegant event. It was neither private nor comfortable, but it was away from the crowd, and that was enough. Zuri turned to face him. 14 months, she said. Luciano met her eyes. He didn't flinch. She had come to understand that about him, that when difficult things arrived, he went very still and very present rather than sideways, and that this quality, which she had initially found unnerving, was in fact one of the things that made him possible to trust. 14 months, he confirmed. You told me it was about my safety. She kept her voice low and even because they were 20 feet from a corridor that connected to a room full of Manhattan's most connected gossips, and she was not going to give anyone a scene on top of the scene that had already occurred. You told me that keeping things quiet was the only way to keep me protected. And I agreed to that, Luciano. I agreed. You did. I did not agree, she said, to stand in a room full of people I work with and need to take seriously and have Preston Hale call me. She stopped, drew a breath through her nose. I did not agree to that being the moment the world finds out I have a husband. He was quiet for a second. I know. That's not enough, she said. I need you to understand what just happened in there. Not from your side of it. From mine. Luciano looked at her with that particular focused attention he gave to things he was determined to understand correctly. No interruption. No defense. Zuri had known men who listened to respond and men who didn't listen at all, and she had learned to recognize something rarer. A man who listened because he genuinely believed the information mattered. Preston Hale spent 18 months making me feel like I was too much of the wrong things and not enough of the right ones, she said. And tonight, he walked into a room where I had worked to build something real, where I was representing 42,000 people who depend on my foundation, and he decided to do it again, in public. And my response to that was to stand there and say nothing because I have spent my whole life being told that women who look like me don't get to cause scenes. She stopped. Her voice was steady, but it was costing her. And then my husband, who I have been keeping secret for over a year, appeared out of nowhere and handled it. And I don't know whether to be grateful or furious. Both seems right, Luciano said. She looked at him. I'm not finished. I know, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I am grateful, she said. I want to be clear about that. But I'm also sitting here understanding that even tonight, even the moment I finally exist publicly, it happened because you decided it was time. Not because I did. I didn't get to choose that either. The fluorescent light above them buzzed once and settled. Somewhere down the corridor a cart rattled. Luciano was quiet long enough that Zuri knew he was not formulating a defense. He was sitting with what she'd said, turning it over, looking at it from the angle she'd given him. That was something she had learned about him over 14 months. His silences were not evasions. They were the visible proof that he took her seriously. You're right, he said. And I don't have a version of this where I come out of it looking like I got the balance correct. I made decisions about your safety that I believed in fully, and in making them I made decisions about your life that weren't mine to make. I told myself those were the same thing. He exhaled slowly. They weren't. She looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. They weren't. Neither of them spoke. The party continued on the other side of the wall, muffled and civilized and completely unaware that the most honest conversation either of these two people had managed in months was happening in a service corridor next to a tray of untouched canapes. What do you need from me? Luciano asked. I need you to stop protecting me from my own life, she said. I need to be your wife in public, not because it's romantic, because I have spent a year and a half being invisible in my own marriage, and I am done with that. He nodded once. Okay. That's it? Okay? What do you want me to say? I want you to mean it, she said. I do. She studied him. The anger had not gone. It was still there, metabolizing slowly, the way real anger does. But underneath it, something else was settling. Something that felt uncomfortably like the future arriving ahead of schedule. The people in that room are going to talk, she said. Yes. By tomorrow morning, there will be journalists. Probably tonight, he said. She almost laughed. It wasn't funny, but it was so precisely accurate that it landed somewhere close to funny, and Zuri had learned that sometimes the distance between laughing and crying is about 6 inches and the air pressure in the room.
What happens to the people who work for me? She asked.
To the foundation? To the programs? Nothing, he said, and this time the word had a different weight behind it. Not a promise exactly, but something with more infrastructure than a promise. I have spent 18 years making sure that the things I'm responsible for don't bleed into the things I care about. Your foundation is the thing I care about most. Nothing touches it. She wanted to believe that. Part of her did believe it, but she was also a woman who had been blindsided before, and her trust, while not broken, had scar tissue on it. I'm going back in there, she said. He blinked. Now? Yes, now. I have 3 board meetings scheduled with people in that room, and I am not going to let Preston Hale or the spectacle of the last 20 minutes be the last thing those people remember about tonight. She reached up and straightened the neckline of her gown with the efficiency of a woman who had learned to make repairs quickly and move on. Are you coming? Luciano looked at her the way he sometimes did when she said something that rearranged his idea of her slightly. Yes, he said. They walked back in together. The room's reaction was not subtle. Conversations paused and restarted. Heads turned and returned to their prior positions with the exaggerated casualness of people pretending not to stare. A woman near the bar whispered something to the man beside her with an intensity that suggested it was not small talk. 3 people immediately reached for their phones. Preston Hale was no longer visible. Zuri scanned the room once and registered his absence without satisfaction or relief. Just the neutral acknowledgement of a variable that had exited the equation for now. She spent the next 40 minutes doing what she had actually come there to do. She spoke to the director of a literacy nonprofit in the Bronx about a potential partnership. She connected with a city council member who had been stalling on a permit for her new Crown Heights location for 4 months, and who, in the context of the evening's recalibrated social dynamics, was now suddenly warm and attentive and very interested in moving quickly on that permit. She was professional and warm and exactly who she had built herself to be, and Luciano stayed nearby without hovering, present but not obstructing. And she noticed, in the peripheral way she noticed most things about him, that several people who approached him with the hesitant deference of people who recognized his name were met with the same clear, careful attention he gave everything. By 10:30, they were in his car heading back toward Brooklyn. Zuri took her shoes off the moment the door closed. Her feet were not built for 4-inch heels, but she had worn them anyway, and she was now paying for that decision in a very specific and unromantic way. The Bronx nonprofit, she said. Marcus Webb. His literacy rate outcomes from last quarter were better than ours. Okay, Luciano said. I want to bring him in, formally, share methodology. I think that's a good idea. She looked at him sideways. You don't know anything about literacy rate outcomes. No, he agreed. But I know when you're talking about work because you need to, and when you're talking about work because it's easier than what you actually want to talk about. She was quiet. We don't have to do the rest of it tonight, he said. There isn't a rest of it, she said. I said what I needed to say. You heard it. Now, we move. That's simple? Nothing about this is simple, she said. But making it complicated in ways that don't help anything is something I used to do and decided to stop. She looked out the window at Brooklyn passing outside. The bridges, the water, the particular messy, luminous sprawl of a borough that had raised her and roughed her up and made her who she was. I meant what I said. I want to exist as your wife, publicly. You will, he said, starting with whatever those journalists are writing tonight. I'll handle... No, she said, not sharply, but clearly. I'll handle it. It's my story, too. He looked at her. Then he nodded, slowly, in the way of a man adjusting to something that had shifted on him. Okay, he said. Your story, too. They did not speak again for the rest of the ride, but it was not the silence of 2 people who had run out of things to say. It was the silence of 2 people who had said enough, for now, and were sitting with the weight of it. The world outside was already moving. By the time they reached the brownstone in Carroll Gardens that served as Zuri's primary residence, where she had her grandmother's reading chair and her own bookshelves, and the particular domestic reality of her life that existed completely outside the assumptions people made about who she was, Her phone had 47 notifications. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the number. Then she set the phone face down on the nightstand and did not look at it again until morning. What she found in the morning was worse and better than she'd expected. 3 major tabloids had the story. The New York Chronicle ran it above the fold on their digital edition at 6:47 a.m. Mystery wife, Mafia. Boss Luciano DeLuca's secret marriage revealed at charity gala. The photo was not bad. Someone had gotten a clean shot of Luciano kissing her hand, which Zuri examined with the detached assessment of a woman deciding how much of herself was visible and whether she was comfortable with it. She was, she decided, basically comfortable with it. The other 2 outlets had gone more aggressively personal. One had already sourced a former colleague of hers from her early Brooklyn college days who described her as brilliant but always kind of in her own world. The other had somehow located Preston Hale, who had released a statement through a publicist, an actual written statement through a publicist before 9 a.m., that described the previous evening's incident as a misunderstanding between old friends and characterized his comments as taken out of context. Zuri read that sentence twice and felt something ignite in her sternum that was not grief and was not fear and was not sadness. It was clarity. Donna called at 7:15. "Are you okay?" "Yes." Are you okay?" "I am actually okay," Zuri said. "Donna, how many times have you told me I needed to stop hiding?" "Many," Donna said. "Many, many, many times. Usually you told me to mind my business." "I'm not hiding anymore." A pause. "Honey, I saw the Chronicle photo." "I know. They're calling him the most feared man in New York." "I know that too." "And you're—" Donna stopped, started again. "I love you. I need you to know that before I ask this question. Are you safe?" "Yes," Zuri said, and meant it. "Okay," Donna said. "Then what do you need from me?" "Come to the library today. I need someone who actually knows me in the room when the reporters show up." "They're going to show up at the library?" "Someone is," Zuri said. "They always go where the story is, and I'd rather be on my own ground when they get there." She got to the Nostrand branch by 8:30, 40 minutes before it opened. She made coffee in the break room. The coffee maker was 12 years old and temperamental, but she knew exactly how to coax it. And she sat at her desk and looked at the Foundation's annual report, which she had been revising for the past 3 weeks, and which she now understood was going to be read by people who had never previously cared about community literacy programs. That was, she decided, an opportunity. She was revising the executive summary when the first knock on the library's staff entrance came at 9:10. She had been expecting a journalist. What she got instead was a young woman, early 20s, expensively dressed in a way that tried to look casual, carrying a folder with the kind of practiced purposefulness that meant she'd been coached on how to look when she delivered something. "Ms. Ellington." "Yes. I've been asked to give you this." She held out the folder. Zuri took it, opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with no letterhead and no signature, and 8 words typed in the center. "He cannot control what he cannot see." She read it twice. Then she looked up, but the young woman was already walking quickly away through the morning crowd on Nostrand Avenue, heels clicking, not looking back. Zuri stood in the doorway of her library holding that piece of paper, and she understood 3 things in rapid and unwelcome succession. First, someone had known she would be here this morning. Not at home. Here. Second, whoever had sent it was not Preston Hale. Preston was petty and wounded and stupid in his cruelty, but this was calibrated in a way that Preston was not capable of. Third, whatever had begun last night in that ballroom had not ended with Preston Hale's public humiliation. It had begun something else entirely. She went inside. She locked the staff door. She called Luciano. He picked up on the second ring. "Someone left me a message," she said, and she read him the 8 words exactly as they appeared on the page. Silence on the other end. Not the comfortable kind. "Don't touch anything else in that envelope," he said. His voice had changed, not louder, but denser, the way a substance changes when you apply pressure to it. "Where are you?" "The library, Nostrand." I'm sending someone. Luciano. Zuri. He said her name in a way that communicated about 15 things at once, most of which were variations on please. Not this morning. Not now. Let me do this one thing. Let me send someone. You can tell me everything I'm doing wrong about it afterward. Right now, let me send someone. She looked at the piece of paper in her hand, at the 8 words, at the blankness of the page around them, which was its own kind of statement. Fine, she said. Stay inside. Don't speak to anyone who wasn't already scheduled. There's a reporter outside. Ignore them for now. She wanted to say something about the irony of him telling her to be invisible again, 24 hours after she told him she was done with invisible. She did not say it. Not because she was softening, she wasn't, but because she understood the difference between the invisibility of shame and the invisibility of strategic caution, and she was not so angry that she couldn't hold that distinction. I'll be there in an hour, he said. You don't need to. I know, he said. I'm coming anyway. The call ended. Zuri set her phone down on her desk and looked around the library, at the shelves she had built, at the children's reading corner with the mismatched beanbag chairs that her staff had spent a Saturday arranging and rearranging until they got it right, at the community board on the far wall where patrons posted tutoring offers and job leads and homework help requests in 3 different languages. 42,000 people. This was what she had built. And now someone who was not Preston Hale, someone who had been watching carefully enough to know her morning schedule, someone patient enough to wait until the morning after her public exposure to move, had sent her 8 words that told her the danger she had married into was not theoretical anymore. It had arrived at her door. And the worst part, the part that sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't dislodge, was that she knew, with a certainty she hadn't had 12 hours ago, that there was no version of the next chapter of her life where she could simply choose to step away from this. Luciano arrived in 53 minutes. Zuri knew because she had been watching the clock on the wall above the returns desk with the particular focused attention of a person who needs something concrete to look at while their mind is doing things they'd rather not examine too closely. 53 minutes. She had spent them doing 3 things: making a second pot of coffee that she didn't drink, reorganizing the new acquisitions cart that didn't need reorganizing, and reading those 8 words on that unsigned piece of paper approximately 30 times without learning anything new from them. He cannot control what he cannot see. The man who came through the staff entrance ahead of Luciano was someone she hadn't met before. Mid-40s, built like a man who had spent decades making his body into a professional instrument, with the kind of face that revealed nothing because it had been trained to reveal nothing. He checked the back corridor and the storage room before he said a single word to her, and then the word he said was clear, directed at someone outside, and then Luciano came in. He was dressed like he'd left wherever he'd been immediately. Jacket, no tie, the slight disorganization of a man who had moved fast but refused to look like it. He looked at her first. Before anything else in the room, just at her. "You're okay," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm fine," she said. "I made coffee." He crossed the room, took the piece of paper from where she'd left it on her desk without touching it again, as instructed, and read it. His face did not change, which told her more than any expression would have. "You recognize it," she said. "The language." He set the paper down. Not the specific phrase, but the style. He looked up at her. "It's a warning. Someone telling me that my choices have consequences they can exploit." "Your choices," she said. "Our choices," he corrected himself. Last night, she pulled out the chair from her desk and sat in it, not because she was tired, but because she needed to stop moving and think clearly. Who knew I would be here this morning? At this location? This early? That's what I'm trying to determine. Because it wasn't in my public calendar. My public calendar shows me at the Crown Heights branch on Thursdays. He was already looking at his phone, typing something. The man who had checked the corridor stood near the back entrance with the still patience of a person who has learned to be architectural. Present but background, like a load-bearing wall. "Luciano." She waited until he looked up. "I need to know if this is connected to something specific, something recent, because if it is, I need to know what it is, And I need to know now, not in a version you've edited for my comfort. He put the phone in his pocket. 3 weeks ago, someone inside my operation accessed financial records they had no clearance to access. We identified it. We thought we'd contained it. You thought. We were wrong. She absorbed that. How wrong? Wrong enough that whoever sent you that note had information about your schedule that could only have come from inside. He said it flatly, without softening it, which she had asked him for and which still landed like something dropped from a height. Which means the leak is still active. She was quiet for a moment. The library around her hummed with its ordinary morning sounds. The heating system, the distant thud of the front door as Donna arrived, the specific papery quiet of a room full of books that had always felt to Zuri like a kind of breathing. How many people know my schedule? She asked. On my end, very few. 4? Maybe 5? Then you have a very small problem to solve, she said. He looked at her with something that might have been respect and might have been the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent 18 years surrounded by people who made simple things complicated and had just been reminded that simplicity was possible. It's not that simple. I didn't say it was simple. I said it was small. Small is solvable. Donna appeared in the doorway between the back corridor and the main floor, took one look at the man standing near the entrance, at Luciano, at Zuri's face, and made the rapid series of calculations that had made her Zuri's closest friend for 20 years. I'm going to open the floor, she said carefully, and not ask any questions until you give me a sign. Thank you, Zuri said. Donna retreated. The man near the entrance shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. Luciano sat down in the chair across from her desk, the one usually occupied by patrons asking for research help or kids waiting for their parents, and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. It made him look, for just a moment, like an ordinary man sitting in an ordinary library having a difficult conversation, and Zuri felt the particular vertigo of that image landing on top of everything else the morning had already asked her to hold. I need to move you, he said, temporarily, until I identify the source. No. Zuri, I said no. She kept her voice level, but she put weight behind it. I am not leaving my library because someone sent me a piece of paper. If I leave every time someone tries to make me feel like I don't belong somewhere, I will spend my entire life in transit. He looked at her for a long moment. This is different. I know it's different. I'm not pretending it isn't different. I'm telling you that the answer is still no, and that if you need to post someone here 24 hours a day to make yourself feel better about that, then post someone here. She folded her hands on the desk. But I open this library every morning and I close it every evening, and I am not stopping that because we made a decision last night that had consequences. We knew it would have consequences. I didn't expect them this fast, he said, and it was the most honest admission she had heard from him in months. Not because he usually lied, but because he usually had more control over what he admitted and when. And this morning, that control had slipped by approximately 3 degrees. Which on Luciano DeLuca registered like an earthquake. Nobody ever does, she said. He nodded slowly. 2 people. Here, rotating. 1, she said. Visible enough to be a deterrent, not so visible that my patrons feel like they're walking into a surveillance situation. These are community members, Luciano. They're not comfortable around that kind of presence. 1.5, he said. She stared at him. That's not a real number. 1 inside, 1 in a car outside. The one inside looks like a volunteer. She thought about it. Fine, but they actually volunteer. They shelve books. They help with the reading program. They are not going to stand in the corner looking threatening. I'll find someone who can shelve books, he said, with the tone of a man making a mental note in a category he had never previously needed. She almost smiled. She didn't. The rest of the morning moved forward with the strange, doubled quality of a day when 2 completely separate realities are operating simultaneously. The library doing what the library did, patrons arriving, children's reading circle at 10:30, a GED prep session at 11 that Zuri ran herself, 3 phone calls from journalists that she didn't take, 1 from a city council member that she did, and underneath all of it, the 8-word note sitting in an evidence bag that Luciano's man had produced from somewhere, the leak inside Luciano's organization that was still open, and the growing awareness that last night's ballroom revelation had not resolved anything. It had detonated something. The call she hadn't been expecting came at 12:47 while she was eating a sandwich at her desk and reviewing the Crown Heights permit application for what felt like the 400th time. It was from a number she didn't recognize. Brooklyn area code. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Ms. Ellington. The voice was male, professional, the careful diction of someone who had learned to speak in a way that gave nothing away. My name is Agent Raymond Collier. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I was hoping we could speak privately. She set down her sandwich. About what? About your foundation, he said, and some financial irregularities we've recently become aware of. The room did not change. The heating system continued its hum. From the main floor, she could hear the muffled voice of her afternoon desk assistant helping someone find the periodicals. Everything was exactly where it had been 30 seconds ago, and simultaneously completely different. What kind of irregularities? She asked, and her voice was steady because she had decided it would be steady. The kind I'd rather discuss in person, Collier said. I understand this may be alarming. I want to be direct with you. At this stage, you are not a subject of investigation. But there is information that has been brought to our attention that affects your organization, and I think it's in your interest to hear it. My attorney will need to be present, she said. A pause. Of course. That's your right. I'd suggest sooner rather than later. Give me a number, she said. I'll have my attorney call you this afternoon. She wrote down the number. She ended the call. She sat very still for approximately 10 seconds. Then she called Luciano. He picked up on the first ring this time. What happened? FBI called, she said. Agent named Raymond Collier. He says there are financial irregularities connected to the foundation. She paused. Luciano, tell me right now if there is anything connected to my foundation that I don't know about. The silence that followed was 4 seconds long. She counted them. No, he said. Nothing I've touched has ever gone near your foundation. That was the first thing I promised you. Then someone is manufacturing it, she said, or surfacing something that was already there without your knowledge. His voice was careful. Zuri, who handles your foundation's financials? She had the answer before he finished the question, but she sat with it for a second because once she said it out loud, it would become a thing she had to act on, and she was not quite ready for how much it was going to hurt. Gerald Mwangi, she said, my executive director. Gerald Mwangi had been with the Ellington Foundation for 6 years. He had come to her from a nonprofit management fellowship, 29 years old and meticulous, and so genuinely, visibly committed to the work that Zuri had promoted him twice in 3 years. He had 3 kids. He had given a speech at their last fundraiser that made 2 board members cry. He knew everything about the Foundation's financials because she had trusted him with everything about the Foundation's financials. She said this to Luciano. Not quickly. She made herself go slowly. Lay it out accurately, because accuracy mattered when you were accusing someone you trusted. Have there been any signs? Luciano asked. She thought about it honestly. He's been off the last 6 weeks, distracted. I thought it was personal. His mother was sick. How much access does he have? Complete access, every account, every grant record, every donor database. Another silence. She could hear Luciano thinking through it in real time. The particular quality of his phone silences was something she had learned to read over 14 months, and this one had a weight to it that she recognized as him arriving somewhere he didn't want to be. I need to make some calls, he said. Don't confront Gerald. Not yet. Don't change anything about how you interact with him today. Can you do that? I can do that, she said, though the thought of sitting across from Gerald at their afternoon budget review and acting like this morning hadn't happened made something in her stomach turn over. I'll come back at 3, he said. Don't call Collier back until I'm there. Your attorney needs to hear what I find out first, he said. 30 minutes won't change the federal timeline, but it might change what your attorney advises. Zuri. He said her name with the same weight as before, but different. Not the restraint of last night. Something raw. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry yet, she said. Find out what's actually happening. She went to the afternoon budget review. Gerald was already in the small conference room when she arrived, laptop open, spreadsheets arrayed in the organized precision that had always been one of his signatures. He was 35, tall, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses he'd started wearing 2 years ago and always forgot to take off between meetings. He looked up when she came in and gave her the careful, slightly muted expression of someone who had obviously seen the morning's headlines and was waiting for her to set the tone. "Morning was something," he said. "It was," she agreed, and sat down, and opened her own folder, and spent the next 90 minutes discussing the Q3 budget variance and the new mobile library vehicle acquisition with a professional competence that cost her more than she would ever fully account for. She watched him throughout. Not obviously. She was subtle about it, or she thought she was. She watched his hands when he pointed to figures on the spreadsheet, the steadiness of them. She watched whether he looked at her longer than necessary when they discussed the donor revenue line, which was the line that would show anomalies most readily if something had been moved. He didn't. His eyes moved across the screen with the same practiced efficiency as always. That was almost worse. If he'd been nervous, she would have had something to grip. This was just Gerald, familiar and competent, and apparently exactly who she had always believed he was, and the possibility that she was wrong about him was sitting in her chest like a physical object she couldn't metabolize. At 3:15, Luciano came back. He did not come to the library. He called her, and she told Gerald she needed to step out, and she went to the small staff parking area behind the building where Luciano was standing next to his car with his hands in his jacket pockets and the expression of a man who had found out something he wished he hadn't. "Tell me," she said. "Gerald Mwangi has made 11 transfers from a foundation grant holding account over the past 4 months," Luciano said. "The amounts are small enough individually to avoid automatic flags, between $8,000 and $12,000 each. Total comes to just under $100,000. She heard it. She let it arrive. She did not allow herself to react until she had the complete picture. Where did it go? An account that traces back to a shell company registered in Delaware." He paused. "The shell company has connections to a financial consulting firm. That firm has, among its clients, Preston Hale." The parking lot was cold. She hadn't brought her coat. She noticed this distantly, the way you notice physical facts when your brain is occupied with something much larger. "Gerald is working with Preston," she said. "The money trail says so," Luciano said carefully. "It doesn't tell me whether Gerald knew who he was ultimately working for, or whether he was desperate enough that he took money without asking too many questions, or whether he's been in it from the start." "Does it matter?" she said. "For how you handle him." "Yes. For the federal exposure? Not immediately." She turned away from him, took 3 steps toward the brick wall of the library's back exterior, and stopped there. She put one hand flat against the brick, not leaning on it, just touching it. The texture of it was rough and specific and real, and she needed something real right now. Gerald Mwangi had been in her office 3 days ago asking her advice about whether his oldest kid should apply for the specialized high school exam. She had told him to let the kid decide. She had meant it warmly. She had felt, in that moment, the specific satisfaction of caring about someone who worked for you as a whole person rather than just a function. 6 years. She took her hand off the brick and turned back to Luciano. "What does the FBI have?" "Enough to open the investigation. Probably not enough yet to move on the foundation itself, which is why Collier came to you first. He wants to see how you respond. He wants to know if I'm complicit. He wants to know if you're cooperative," Luciano said. "There's a difference, and it matters." "What does my attorney say?" "She says cooperate fully, immediately, and get ahead of the narrative," which I agree with. "You agree with cooperating with a federal investigation?" "When my wife is the one being threatened by the investigation, yes," he said. "I cooperate very enthusiastically with federal investigations." She looked at him. There was something almost wry in the way he'd said it, and under any other circumstances she might have found it funny, but right now it just landed as honest, which was its own kind of comfort. "I need to fire Gerald," she said. "Not yet," Luciano said. "I know, but not yet. If you fire him now, he goes to ground and Collier loses the thread. If you keep him in place for 72 more hours, my people and the federal investigators can— Don't tell me what your people are going to do, she said. Not harshly, but clearly. Tell me what the legal options are. The ones that don't put me in the position of asking your organization to manage a federal situation. He took that in. Fair. I have built this foundation for 15 years, she said, and her voice was still steady, but it was doing something different now, something that took more effort to contain. I have 42,000 people who use these programs. I have employees who took pay cuts to stay with me because they believed in what we were doing. I have— She stopped, started again. Gerald gave a speech at the last gala that made people cry. He made me almost cry. And apparently while he was doing that, he was handing our money to a shell company connected to a man who publicly humiliated me at a charity event. She stopped speaking. She was not going to cry. She was absolutely certain she was not going to cry in a parking lot behind a library building in front of her husband, who was watching her with the focused attention of someone who understood that this particular moment required him to do nothing except be present and not attempt to fix what couldn't be fixed quickly. Okay, she said, finally, to herself as much as to him. Okay, he said. I'm past the part where I'm allowed to be shocked, she said. Shocked is a luxury. What are the next steps? He laid them out. Attorney meeting tonight. Controlled cooperation with Collier. Carefully structured to protect the Foundation's legal standing while establishing Zuri's complete personal non-involvement. Preservation of all financial records. And the part that she was going to hate, keeping Gerald in his seat, operational, acting normal, for 72 hours while the full picture was assembled. 72 hours, she repeated. Possibly less. Every hour I sit across from him knowing this, I'm asking him to trust me with our work while I'm actively not trusting him, she said. I need you to understand what that costs. I understand. No, she said. You understand it intellectually. Tell me you understand what it costs someone who built her entire professional life on the idea that the work only functions when the trust is real. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're right, I don't fully understand that. But I believe you that it's significant. It was not everything she wanted. It was honest. And honest was what she had asked for at the beginning of all of this. So she held on to it. She went back inside. She went back to her desk. She passed Gerald in the hallway and he said, Great meeting today. And she said, Agreed. Let's circle back on the vehicle acquisition tomorrow. And she went into her office and closed the door very quietly and sat in her chair in the particular silence of a person who has just discovered that betrayal, when it finally arrives, is less like a knife and more like a slow leak, the kind that ruins foundations from the inside invisibly for months before the structure finally shows the damage. Her phone buzzed. A message from Luciano. Attorney confirmed for 7 p.m. You won't be alone in this. She looked at the message for a long time. Then she looked up at the wall across from her desk, where she had pinned a photograph taken 3 years ago at the opening of the Crown Heights branch. 50 community members crowded into a small room that smelled like fresh paint and new books. And Zuri, in the middle of all of them, not at the front, not at a podium, just in it, surrounded by the people she had built this for. Gerald was in that photograph, left side, slightly out of focus, grinning at something someone off camera had said. She looked at his face in the photograph for a long time. Then she opened her laptop, pulled up the Foundation's donor database, and began the quiet, methodical work of auditing every financial record from the past 6 months herself, line by line, because she was not going to wait 72 hours to understand the full extent of what had been done to her, and because the only thing she had ever fully trusted, more than any person, more than any promise, was the evidence in front of her own eyes. The audit took her 4 hours and 20 minutes. Zuri did not move from her desk except once, to lock her office door and once more to refill her water glass, and by the time the library had closed for the evening and the last staff member had called goodnight through the door, and she had called goodnight back in a voice that sounded completely like her own, she had found $114,000 moved across 11 transactions, 3 falsified grant reporting entries, and a donor acknowledgement letter sent to a corporation that, when she cross-referenced it against the Secretary of State's business registry, did not exist. She sat with that number. $114,000, 6 years of trust, 3 falsified documents in a foundation that had built its entire reputation on transparency. She printed the audit trail, folded it into a manila envelope, wrote her attorney's name on the front, and put it in her bag. Then she turned off her desk lamp, sat in the dark for approximately 2 minutes, and stood up. The attorney's name was Patricia Osei, and she had an office in Midtown that felt like a room designed to communicate that the person sitting across from you had navigated worse situations than yours and survived them. Patricia was 51, Ghanaian American, and had the particular quality of absolute non-panic that Zuri associated with people who had been tested by genuinely catastrophic situations and had come out the other side with their judgment intact. Luciano was already there when Zuri arrived at 7. He stood when she came in, which was a habit of his she had initially found formal and had come to understand as simply the way he was, an expression of regard that had been built into him somewhere early enough that it was involuntary. She set the manila envelope on Patricia's desk without preamble. 114,000, 11 transactions, 3 falsified entries, 1 fictitious donor. Patricia opened the envelope. She read without speaking. Luciano stayed where he was, slightly behind and to the left of Zuri, present in the way of someone who has understood that this meeting is not his to lead. "How did you compile this?" Patricia asked, still reading. "Foundation accounting software has a full audit log. I've had administrator access since we launched the platform. Gerald doesn't know I pulled it. I accessed through a secondary admin account we set up for the board treasurer that hasn't been used since February." Patricia looked up. "He wouldn't know you'd accessed it." "Not unless someone told him," Zuri said. "And nobody knows I did it except you two." Patricia set the papers down and looked at both of them in the measured way of someone calibrating how much to say. "This is clean documentation. It's exactly what Collier needs." She paused. "It's also what makes the next 72 hours the most dangerous part of this." "Explain dangerous," Luciano said. "If Gerald is sophisticated enough to have run this without Zuri noticing for 4 months, he's monitoring himself. The moment he suspects he's been found out, he either runs or he makes contact with whoever is directing this, and that contact could burn evidence we need." Patricia looked at Zuri. "You said you have a budget meeting with him tomorrow morning." 9 a.m., Zuri said. "You need to be in that meeting. Normal. Identical to every other meeting you've had with him. Can you do that?" Zuri thought about the photograph on her wall. Gerald slightly out of focus, grinning. "Yes," she said. "I can do that." "I'll reach out to Collier tonight," Patricia said. "With this documentation, we're not supplicants asking for consideration. We're coming in with evidence that positions the foundation as the victim of internal fraud, not the vehicle for it. That changes the conversation significantly." She closed the envelope. "The goal is to have federal eyes on Gerald's activity by tomorrow morning so that when you're sitting across from him, there are people watching the digital trail in real time." "And Preston Hale?" Luciano asked. "Preston Hale is the end of the thread," Patricia said. "Right now he's connected only through the shell company. That's enough to make him interesting, but not enough to move on him. We need Gerald to move money again, or make contact, with federal surveillance in place." She looked at Luciano with the directness of a woman who had dealt with complicated clients and had no interest in being handled carefully. "My client is the Foundation and Ms. Ellington. My advice is structured around legal exposure and institutional protection. If there are other dimensions to how you'd like to address Mr. Hale, I don't need to know about them, and I'm formally advising against them." Luciano met her eyes. "Understood." Patricia looked back at Zuri. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow is a performance, and performances require rest." Zuri almost said that she hadn't managed a full night of sleep since the gala 2 days ago, and didn't expect to start now. She didn't say it. She thanked Patricia, picked up her bag, and walked out of the office with Luciano beside her. In the elevator, he said, "You found all of that yourself." "I know my own books," she said. Patricia looked at that audit and didn't find a single error. "I said I know my books." He was quiet for a moment, then, "When this is over, your foundation is going to need a new executive director." "I'm aware of that." "I know someone. Former nonprofit CFO, 12 years clean management record, currently consulting. She's..." "Luciano." She looked at him. The elevator was small and he was close, and she was so tired that her eyes hurt. Let me get through tomorrow first. He stopped. Right. She did not sleep well. She slept some. Her body insisted on approximately 4 hours. And she spent the rest of the night alternating between the ceiling and the window, and, eventually, her grandmother's copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God, which she had read so many times the spine had given up and the pages spread loose in her hands like letters someone had kept. She read without quite absorbing it, which was fine. The words weren't the point. The weight of the book in her hands was the point. At 6:15, she got up, showered, made oatmeal she ate without tasting, and put on the charcoal blazer she wore when she needed to feel like herself in difficult rooms. Gerald arrived at the library at 8:52. She heard him come in through the front, heard him greet the morning desk assistant by name, heard the familiar rhythm of him moving through the space he'd occupied for 6 years as though it was his own, the particular ownership of someone who has invested enough of themselves in a place that they've stopped distinguishing between belonging and possessing. She had her coffee, she had the budget folders, she had Patricia's voice in her head saying identical to every other meeting, and she had, somewhere below all of that, the 4 hours of audit work and the knowledge that somewhere in a federal office building a team was watching Gerald Mwangi's financial activity with the attention of people whose job it was to watch without blinking. He knocked on her open door at 3 minutes past 9. "Ready for me?" "Come in," she said. "Close the door." He sat. He opened his laptop. He was wearing a blue sweater she recognized. He'd worn it to the last board meeting. She had complimented it. He had said his wife had picked it out. She knew the width of his wedding ring and the name of his youngest daughter and which borough his mother lived in, and she sat across from him for 91 minutes discussing grant allocation and Q4 projections and the vehicle acquisition timeline, and she did not let any of that surface. She was methodical. She asked the right questions about the right line items. She made notes on the right pages. When he referenced the holding account, the account she had spent 4 hours auditing the night before, she did not pause, did not look up, did not let the hand holding her pen tighten. 91 minutes. When it was done, Gerald closed his laptop and said, "You seem tired." She looked at him. "Lot happening," she said. "The press attention from the gala, trying to keep everything steady." He nodded. "It's been strange around here. People asking questions." "People always ask questions," she said. "That's what libraries are for." He smiled. It was a real smile, and she could tell the difference. She had cataloged his expressions over 6 years, and that was the thing that sat in her stomach like a stone as he left. The fact that the smile was real, which meant either that he had no idea she knew, or that he was so far committed to the performance that his face had learned to mean something it didn't. She didn't know which was worse. Patricia called at 11:47. Her voice had the contained energy of someone delivering news that is moving fast. Collier's team flagged movement. 40 minutes ago, Gerald made a transfer from the holding account. Different shell company, same ownership structure. They're in. Zuri exhaled slowly. How long? Hours, not days. They're pulling the warrant now. A pause. Zuri, you need to not be at the library when this happens. I know that's not what you want to hear. No, she said. Listen to me. When federal agents arrive at a place of business, the person in charge needs to be reachable by counsel, not standing in the middle of a scene that will be photographed and misinterpreted. You leave, you come to my office, you are the cooperative victim and not the embattled institution director. She looked around her office. At the audit printout she'd already sent Patricia, at the photograph on the wall, at the children's reading corner visible through her interior window, where a grandmother was sitting with a small kid in a yellow jacket reading something with pictures in it, the kid's finger tracking across the page with the specific concentrated effort of someone learning that letters mean something. 2 hours, Patricia said. That's all I'm asking. Zuri closed her eyes, opened them. I'll be there in 30 minutes. She told her desk assistant she had an off-site meeting. She took her bag. She did not look at Gerald's closed office door as she passed it in the hallway because she did not trust what her face would do. She was in Patricia's office at 12:20. At 2:41, Patricia's phone rang. She listened for 40 seconds, said, "Understood," and hung up. "Gerald is in federal custody," she said. "Agents executed the warrant at the library at 2:15. He did not resist." Zuri nodded. She had known it was coming. It still arrived like something physical. A dull, heavy impact in the center of her chest that was not grief exactly, but was grief's infrastructure. "Preston Hale?" she asked. "Not yet. The shell company gives them the connection, but they'll need Gerald's cooperation to move up the chain."
Patricia paused. Gerald's attorney made contact within 20 minutes of arrest. He's going to negotiate. He'll give them Preston. Very likely. People who move money for powerful men tend to understand when the moment arrives that the powerful men are not going to return the favor. Patricia set her phone down. "There's something else." Zuri looked at her. "The second shell company, the one Gerald transferred to this morning, it wasn't just receiving money. Collier's team found it was also the payment source for something else. Hired surveillance. On you." Patricia said it carefully, watching Zuri's face. "Someone has been paying for detailed daily reporting on your movements, your schedule, your foundation contacts. For 6 weeks." The 8-word note. "He cannot control what he cannot see." "Preston's been building a file," Zuri said. "Looks that way. For what purpose we don't know yet. But Collier considers it significant enough that he wants to discuss personal security arrangements." Luciano's name sat in Zuri's mouth unspoken. She didn't say it. "I'll discuss it with my husband," she said, and the word husband landed differently than it had 48 hours ago. Heavier, more specific, carrying the full weight of what it actually meant to be tied to this particular man in this particular situation. She left Patricia's office at 3:30 and called Luciano from the car. "Gerald is in custody," she said. "Preston's next." "I know," he said. "You know. Collier's office made 3 calls in the last hour. I'm informed about federal activity that intersects with my interests." She did not ask how. She had decided early in their marriage that there were mechanisms in his world she was going to remain deliberately ignorant of, not because she was naive, but because there was a difference between understanding a person and requiring full transparency about every instrument they used, and she had drawn that line and she was keeping it. "They found the surveillance operation," she said. "Someone's been tracking my schedule for 6 weeks." A pause. "I know that too." "Did you know before today?" Silence. 3 seconds. 4. "Luciano, I identified a surveillance operation on you 9 days ago," he said. "I was managing it." The car felt smaller. "Managing it. I was feeding incorrect information through the channels they were using to track you, controlled, making sure they had your schedule wrong enough that any plan they were building around it would fail. You knew someone was watching me," she said, "and you didn't tell me. I was protecting Paz. Don't." The word came out flat and sharp. "Do not tell me you were protecting me. We had that conversation 2 days ago. We agreed. We agreed I wouldn't make structural decisions about your life without telling you. This was an operational—" "It is my life," she said. "The surveillance is of me, my schedule, my building, my patrons. That is my life, Luciano, and you sat on it for 9 days while I walked into my library every morning not knowing that someone was watching the door." The silence this time was different. Not the thinking kind. The kind that comes after someone has absorbed a hit and is deciding whether to be honest about how much it hurt. "You're right," he said. "I made the same mistake." "Yes," she said. "You did." She ended the call. She did not speak to him again for 6 hours. The thing about real anger, the kind that comes from genuine betrayal rather than frustration or fear, is that it doesn't perform. It goes quiet and it goes internal, and it works on you from the inside, and Zuri had learned over 37 years to respect it rather than rush it. She gave herself the 6 hours. She sat with it. She let it tell her what it actually was. What it was, she understood by 9 o'clock that evening, was not the end of something. It was the final proof of something she had half known and needed to fully know, that Luciano DeLuca, who was in most respects one of the most honest people she had ever encountered, had one place where his honesty had a ceiling, And that ceiling was his instinct to control the perimeter of the people he loved before he allowed himself to be honest with them. It was not malice. She believed that completely. It was something older and more stubborn than malice. The protective architecture of a man who had spent his life in a world where information was currency and sharing it was always a calculated risk, and who had not yet learned, not fully, that the woman he had married was not someone he needed to protect from information. She was someone who processed information and acted on it. She was a librarian for the love of everything. She had built her entire professional existence on the premise that knowledge, however uncomfortable, made people more capable rather than less. At 9:15, she called him back. "I need you to understand something," she said, "and I need you to hear it not as a criticism, but as a requirement." "Okay," he said. "Every time you decide what I can handle before you tell me, you're doing to me exactly what every person who underestimated me has ever done. You're deciding the shape of my reality before you let me encounter it, and you need to stop." The silence this time was the good kind, the real listening kind. "I understand," he said. "I need it to actually change," she said. "Not just tonight." "I know." "Okay," she said. "Now, tell me everything you know about the surveillance operation." "Everything. From the beginning," he told her. It took 40 minutes, and it was more detailed and more alarming than she had expected in some places, and less in others. And when he was done, she had a much clearer picture of what Preston Hale had been building and why. Preston had not simply been trying to humiliate her or damage her reputation. He had been building a case, or rather, the architecture of a case, the kind of documented association between the Ellington Foundation and Luciano DeLuca's world that could be presented to the right people at the right moment to destroy both of them simultaneously. The surveillance was evidence collection. The financial manipulation was foundation destabilization. He had been doing it methodically for 6 weeks, which meant he had started planning it before the gala, which meant the ballroom confrontation had not been impulsive cruelty. It had been a test. He had walked up to Zuri in that ballroom and said those things out loud to see whether Luciano would respond, to see whether he could provoke a reaction that would confirm the connection before his evidence was complete. "He wanted you to come forward," she said, when Luciano had finished. "He set me up to bait you into revealing yourself." "Yes," Luciano said. "And it worked." "Yes." She sat with that for a moment. "He's smarter than I gave him credit for." "Most dangerous people are," Luciano said. "The ones who aren't don't stay dangerous long." "What does he do next, now that Gerald is arrested and the federal threat is pulling toward him?" "A man like Preston, cornered. He doesn't go quiet. He goes loud. He tries to control the narrative before the narrative controls him." Luciano paused. "He's going to do something public, something big enough that even if he goes down, he makes sure we go down with him." "The art auction," she said. "The Meridian Foundation's charity art auction is in 4 days." "I know. He's on the host committee. He donated a piece." "I know that too." "Luciano," she steadied her voice. "Are you going to tell me you've been building something? Something you haven't told me about?" A beat, shorter than the others. "Yes," he said. "Tell me now." "I need you to be physically present for what I'm about to tell you, not on a phone," he said. "Can you come here?" She looked at the clock. 9:58 p.m. She looked at the window. She looked at her grandmother's reading chair in the corner, which she had been trying to get back to for about 72 hours. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. She arrived in 18. Luciano's primary residence was a brownstone in Red Hook that from the outside looked like every other well-maintained Red Hook brownstone. Modest, brick-faced, nothing that announced itself. Inside it was different in ways she had grown accustomed to over 14 months. The security infrastructure that blended into the architecture so seamlessly you had to know to look for it. The particular absence of anything unnecessary. The way the rooms felt inhabited without being decorated. As though someone lived there very fully without ever trying to make it look like they did. He was in the room he used as an office. No desk, just a table with a laptop and several phones and a corkboard on one wall that she'd been told not to photograph, which she never had and never would. His jacket was off. He had the look of a man who had not considered sleep an option since approximately Tuesday. Spread across the table was documentation she recognized as the kind of careful assembly that meant someone had been working on this for longer than 4 days. The Renaissance painting, he said. The one Preston is donating to the Meridian auction. He announced it last week, she said. There was a press release. A Titian, allegedly from a private European collection. Not allegedly, Luciano said. Definitively from a private European collection. Specifically, a collection that was catalogued in 2019 by Interpol as part of an art theft investigation that was never fully resolved. He turned one of the papers toward her. The painting was reported stolen from a private estate in Lombardy in 2016. The current documentation shows a 2018 sale from a dealer in Antwerp who, as of 2021, is serving 12 years for art fraud. She looked at the paper. At the provenance chain, which she was not an art expert but was absolutely an expert in reading documentation for authenticity. The chain of title is fabricated. Completely, from the 2018 sale forward. He looked at her steadily. Preston Hale is about to publicly donate a stolen Renaissance masterpiece to a charity auction attended by every major political figure in Manhattan, in the full view of journalists, philanthropists, and federal investigators who will, if certain information reaches the right desk before Saturday evening, be very prepared for what they're about to witness. She looked at him. You've already sent the information. I sent it this afternoon, he said, to Collier's office and to an independent art fraud investigator at the Manhattan DA who has been building a case on this particular dealer network for 3 years. Before you told me. He met her eyes. Before I told you, and I know what you're going to say. Do you? That I did it again. Made the decision before I brought you in. He didn't look away. You're right, I did. And I'm telling you now, tonight, 4 days before the auction, because I am trying, imperfectly, and apparently still not well enough, to do this differently than I've done everything else. She looked at the documentation on the table. At the photograph of the painting, a dark, rich canvas showing figures she didn't recognize in the particular dense luminosity of something very old and very expensive and very thoroughly stolen, at the chain of title with its fabricated links. 4 days, she said. 4 days, he confirmed, and Saturday night, in front of everyone he's ever used to make himself untouchable, Preston Hale gets arrested for donating stolen art to a children's charity. That's the shape of it, Luciano said. She looked at him. It's not enough. He blinked. The stolen painting alone is the art fraud case, she said. That's one charge, one channel. What about the financial manipulation? What about the surveillance? What about the foundation? She moved to the table, looked at the papers laid out there, and her hands were very steady. If we do this right, if Saturday goes the way it should go, it needs to be everything. Art fraud, financial fraud, the shell company, Gerald's cooperation, the surveillance operation, all of it surfacing simultaneously from multiple investigative directions so that there is no version of Saturday night where Preston controls the story afterward, no version where he reframes it, no single charge he can plea down and walk away from with his reputation mostly intact. She looked up. I want him to have nothing left. Luciano looked at her for a long moment. Something changed in his face. Not softened, that was the wrong word. Clarified, like a photograph coming into focus. That, he said quietly, is going to require coordination between Collier's office, the DA's art fraud unit, and at least 2 other investigative channels that I would need to activate in ways that will be visible to people who are watching me. I know, she said. It exposes me, he said. Not legally. The information I'm providing is clean, but it tells people watching my organization that I've been moving against a specific target in cooperation with federal investigators, which complicates certain existing arrangements. I know that too, she said. He was quiet. You told me, she said, on the night you proposed this marriage, that you would give up whatever I asked. I'm asking. The room was very still. Outside, Red Hook made its nighttime sounds. Water somewhere, the distant mechanism of the city that never fully stops. The corkboard on the wall held its accumulated intelligence about people and situations she was not cleared to know. And she stood in the middle of it all, Zuri DeLuca, a Brooklyn librarian in a charcoal blazer who had audited her own foundation in the dark and read a stolen painting's provenance chain at 10 o'clock at night, and was now asking the most dangerous man she knew to spend something it would cost him to spend it. He picked up his phone. He made the first call. She listened to him talk, precise, quiet, the language of a man accustomed to giving instructions that were followed without repetition. And she looked at the photograph of the stolen painting and thought about Preston Hale 4 days from now, in a room full of the people he had spent his life performing for. At the moment, he understood that the woman he had laughed at in an emerald gown had not only refused to disappear, but had become the gravitational center of the force that was about to dismantle him. Luciano ended the first call and made the second. And then, from somewhere in the building, from a floor above, from behind a door she hadn't noticed, came the sound of a door opening, and footsteps, and a voice she didn't recognize saying her husband's name with the particular flat urgency of someone delivering news that could not wait. Luciano turned. She turned. The man in the doorway was someone from his organization. She had seen him before, briefly, once, the kind of face you remember because it doesn't try to be memorable. And he was breathing slightly harder than normal, which on a man like that meant something had happened that was beyond the ordinary threshold of things that happened in a life like this. "There's a problem," the man said. Luciano set his phone down. "What kind?" "Your cousin," the man said. "Marco. He's moved." The temperature in the room did not change. Everything else did. "Moved where?" Luciano said. His voice had gone to the place it went when the surface of him became very controlled because what was underneath required it. The man looked briefly at Zuri, a fraction of a second, then back to Luciano. "The Crown Heights branch," he said. "The library. He sent 4 men. They arrived 20 minutes ago." Zuri was already moving before the man finished the sentence, her bag coming off the chair, her hand finding her phone, her body making the calculation her mind was still catching up to, because Crown Heights was her library, her people, her books, her staff, the community boardroom where she had first spoken to Luciano, the place that meant more to her than any address she had ever lived at. And she was halfway to the door when Luciano's hand closed around her arm, not forcefully, but with the absolute certainty of someone who needed her to stop for 3 seconds. "Zuri." His voice was the quietest she had ever heard it. How many staff were closing tonight? She made herself think. 2. Dara and... She stopped. Her throat closed briefly. "Marcus, the new reading program coordinator. He stays late on Thursdays." Luciano looked at the man in the doorway. 2 staff members inside, he said. Luciano made the 3rd call before the 2nd one had fully ended. Zuri heard him give the Crown Heights address in the same quiet, pressurized voice he used when something required absolute precision and absolute speed simultaneously, and she understood from the way his team in the doorway responded. A single nod, then gone, moving with the efficiency of people who had rehearsed for contingencies exactly like this one, that whatever was happening at her library was already being responded to. Understanding it and accepting it were different things. "I'm going," she said. "Zuri, Dara has a 7-year-old, she said. "Marcus just started 3 weeks ago. He took a pay cut to come work for me." She looked at Luciano, and her voice did not shake, because she did not allow it to. "I'm going." He looked at her for 1 second. 1 full second of the particular calculation she had watched him make a dozen times over 14 months. The one where he weighed what was safe against what was true, and arrived usually at what was true. "With me," he said. "Not ahead of me. With me." "Fine." They were in the car in 4 minutes. A second vehicle followed. Luciano sat beside her in the back seat, and his phone was in his hand continuously, receiving information she could only hear his half of, and she watched Brooklyn pass outside the window. Flatbush bleeding into Crown Heights, the street she had walked since childhood, the corner store where her grandmother used to send her for milk, the church where her aunt's funeral had been held, all of it familiar in nighttime and moving past her at a speed that felt both too fast and too slow. "What does Marco want?" she asked. She kept her voice level. "Not tactically. What does he actually want from this?" Luciano lowered his phone. "Marco has wanted my position for 11 years. He's been patient about it, unusually patient." He paused. "When our marriage became public, he understood two things. First, that I had a vulnerability I'd never had before. Second, that I had changed the terms of how the organization operates in ways he's been opposing for years." "The legitimization," she said. "He's not interested in legitimate businesses. He's not interested in what I've been building. He thinks it's weakness. And destroying my library sends a message to every faction watching," he said, "that I can't protect what matters to me. That sentiment has made me soft, that I'm replaceable." He said it without self-pity, just factual. He's not doing this for Preston Hale. He's doing this because Saturday night was going to expose a framework where I cooperate with federal investigators, and that is a line that half the people in my world consider unforgivable. He found out about Saturday. He found out today, which means he moved tonight because he needed to move before Saturday, and because he knew— Luciano stopped. "He knew that if he touched something of yours, I would have to respond in a way that showed the whole organization exactly where my priorities are. It's a trap." "Then don't walk into it," she said. He looked at her. "You said it yourself," she said. "He wants you to respond in a way that defines you, so define yourself differently than he's expecting." She thought fast. "Your people are already there?" 30 seconds out when I last checked. "And the staff? Dara and Marcus?" He checked his phone. His jaw tightened once. "In the building. Marco's men locked the front entrance from the outside. They haven't gone in." "They're creating a situation," she said, "not resolving one. They want you to arrive and escalate." "Yes." "Then you arrive and de-escalate," she said. "You get my people out. You don't give Marco the confrontation he's staged." "That's not how this works," Luciano said. "If I walk away from a direct challenge without—" "I'm not asking you to walk away," she said. "I'm asking you to choose the battlefield." She turned to face him fully in the back seat of that moving car. "You've spent 18 years playing the game by rules you inherited from a man who built the rules to serve himself. You told me you wanted to be a different kind of leader, lead differently. Tonight, specifically. Right now." The car was slowing. She could see the Crown Heights branch ahead. The lit windows, which meant power was still on, which meant whoever was inside hadn't started anything yet, and the shape of several figures near the entrance that resolved, as they pulled closer, into 4 men standing with the particular loose posture of people trying to look casual while being neither. Luciano's team had arrived first. 2 vehicles, engine off, positioned with the kind of deliberate geometry that communicated readiness without aggression. The 4 men near the entrance had noticed them and had gone still in the way that people go still when they've realized the numerical equation has shifted. The car stopped. Luciano got out. Zuri got out on her side before anyone could suggest otherwise. The night air was cold and smelled like Crown Heights at 10:30. Exhaust and someone's cooking from an apartment above the dry cleaner across the street. A dog somewhere. The ordinary nighttime respiration of a neighborhood that was always more alive than it looked to people who didn't know it. Marco DeLuca was not among the 4 men at the entrance. She had never met him. She knew his name, had seen one photograph, understood from everything Luciano had told her that he was 6 years younger than Luciano, that they had grown up in the same household after Marco's mother died, and that the years between them had never fully resolved into anything comfortable. One of the 4 men spoke. She didn't catch all of it. It was directed at Luciano, low, with the specific syntax of a message being delivered rather than a conversation being initiated. Luciano listened. His hands were at his sides. His face was what she had come to think of as his operational face. Present, reading, revealing nothing. He responded. 6 words. She caught 3 of them. "Open the door now." The man looked at his phone, typed something, waited 4 seconds. The front entrance of her library clicked and swung open. Zuri moved. She didn't run. Running would have looked like panic, and she was not going to give anyone standing on this sidewalk the satisfaction of seeing her panic.
She walked fast, past the four men who parted without being asked, through the door of her own library, into the light. Dara was in the middle of the main floor, sitting in one of the adult reading chairs with her coat still on and her hands in her lap, in the position of someone who has been told to stay still and has complied because the alternative was worse. She was 28 years old, and she was frightened. Zuri could see it in the set of her shoulders, the careful, controlled breathing of someone who had been managing fear for a period of time that had felt long. But she was not hurt, and when she saw Zuri, she exhaled in a way that deflated her by about 2 inches. "Ms. Ellington." "I'm here," Zuri said. "You're okay?" "Yeah." Dara stood. Her legs were slightly unsteady. She put one hand briefly on the chair. Nobody came inside. They just locked us in." "Where's Marcus?" "Back room. He called 911, Dara said, and then looked worried. "Was that wrong?" "That was exactly right," Zuri said. "Stay here." She found Marcus in the storage room in the back, phone pressed to his ear, 24 years old and holding himself together with the specific dignity of someone who had decided that this situation was not going to define how he handled himself. He looked up when she came in and visibly reconfigured. "There's police coming," he said into the phone, and then to her, "I told them there were men outside who locked us in. Should I have—" "You did exactly the right thing," she said. "Tell them the situation appears to be resolved, but to please still respond." He relayed this. She looked around the storage room, at the boxes of the new shipment that had arrived Tuesday, children's books for the mobile program, bright spines visible through the open flaps of the nearest box. Everything intact, everything exactly where it should be. She went back to the main floor. Luciano was inside now. The four men from the entrance were not. She could see through the front windows that they were on the sidewalk, and that Luciano's people had redistributed around them in a geometry that was less about containment and more about presence, the organizational equivalent of standing close enough to make a point without making contact. 2 police vehicles were visible at the far end of the block, moving toward them. Luciano looked at her when she came back to the main floor. The question on his face was the same one as always. "Are you okay?" And her answer was the same. "I'm fine." But what passed between them in that exchange was more layered than those 4 words contained. It was the acknowledgement that fine was relative, that tonight had been a particular kind of test, and that they were both still standing inside her library with the lights on. The police response was absorbed into the situation with the characteristic friction of an institution arriving at a scene that has already been resolved by forces it doesn't fully understand. Zuri spoke to an officer for 12 minutes, gave a clear and accurate account of what Dara and Marcus had experienced, stated that the men responsible had left the premises, and did not introduce any information that would complicate the narrative beyond what was relevant. The officer was professional. He took notes. He asked whether she wanted to press charges. She said she would consult her attorney. Dara's partner came to pick her up. Zuri walked her out and stood on the sidewalk until the car drove away. Marcus stayed 20 minutes longer, helping Zuri check that everything in the library was exactly as it should be. And when she finally told him to go home, he did so with the particular straightened posture of a young man who had been frightened tonight and did not want the night to end with him still looking frightened. She stood alone in her library at 11:45 p.m. The lights were on, the books were on their shelves. The children's reading corner had its mismatched beanbag chairs. The community board had its multilingual posting of tutoring offers and job leads. Everything was where it was supposed to be, and none of it had been touched. And she stood in the middle of it and understood something about herself that she had not fully articulated before tonight. She was not going to stop. That was the thing. Not as a resolution or a declaration. She wasn't that kind of person. She had never needed to announce herself to herself. Just as a fact, arriving with the quietness of things that are so true they don't require much ceremony. She was not going to stop coming to this library. She was not going to stop running these programs or fighting for these permits, or expanding these shelves, or believing that 42,000 people deserved better access to the written word than the city had historically thought to give them. Whatever came at her, and she understood now, more clearly than she had 72 hours ago, that more things would come, she was not going to stop. Luciano was waiting outside. She turned off the lights, set the alarm, locked the door. She stood on the sidewalk beside him in the cold, and they were both quiet for a moment, looking at the closed library, at the dark windows that in 11 hours would be open again. "Marco," she said. "Will be handled," Luciano said. "Handled how?" He looked at her. "Removed from the organization, permanently, not—" He paused. "Removed, not the other thing. I want to be clear about that." She looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you. He'll be contained. He'll understand that tonight was his last move, and he'll understand why." His voice was very quiet. "Because I'm done letting the organization's logic write the ending to things. That's been the problem for 18 years. Every time I've made a decision, I've made it inside the organization's frame, what it requires, what it expects, what it will tolerate." He looked at the library. "I'm done with that frame." "That's a significant thing to say," she said. "It's a significant thing to mean," he said. "I mean it." She looked at him. At this complicated, guarded, imperfectly honest man who had walked into a ballroom and changed both their lives with one sentence, and who was standing outside her locked library at midnight, having just made 3 phone calls that would cost him real currency in the world he moved through, and who was looking at her with the expression she had learned to read as the face he made when he wasn't performing anything, when the management of his exterior had simply stopped because she was the one person in front of whom it didn't feel necessary. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They went home. Saturday arrived with the particular charged quality of a day that has been constructed to matter. The weather was November cooperative, cold and clear, the sky the specific sharp blue that Manhattan gets in autumn when the humidity drops out and the light becomes architectural. Zuri wore dark green, not the emerald of the gala. This was something quieter, a wool dress that her mother had helped her pick years ago for a library board presentation and that she had worn on 6 subsequent occasions when she needed to feel like someone whose roots went deeper than the situation she was walking into. The Meridian Foundation's charity art auction was held at a venue in the West 50s, a converted space that had been a printing house in a previous life and now served as the preferred backdrop for events that wanted to signal cultural seriousness without looking like they were trying. By 7 p.m., it held approximately 260 people, philanthropists, journalists, city officials, several federal investigators who were dressed to blend in and who were doing so with varying degrees of success, and Preston Hale, who arrived at 7:20 with a publicist and an expression of a man who had decided that the best defense was an offense, and that the offense was confidence. Zuri arrived at 7:35. She did not arrive with Luciano. They had discussed this and agreed. She arrived as herself, as the executive director of the Ellington Foundation, as a representative of the literacy community that had every reason to be at this event. He would arrive separately, later, unremarkably. 2 people with independent reasons to be in the same room. She spoke to the director of a Bedford-Stuyvesant reading nonprofit within 4 minutes of arriving. She spoke to a deputy superintendent from the Department of Education within 10. She was working the room the way she always worked rooms. Not performing warmth, but actually being warm, because the difference was always visible to the people who mattered, and those were the only people she cared about reading her accurately. She saw Preston across the room at 7:50. He saw her. What moved across his face was not what she had expected, and she had spent considerable time in the past 4 days trying to anticipate it. She had expected calculation, the rapid reassessment of a man reorienting his strategy. She had expected a performance of confidence, the social armor he had always worn so fluently. She had not expected what she actually saw, which was something closer to recognition. The expression of a man who understands, in the moment he sees a specific face across a specific room, that the thing he thought he was still ahead of has already passed him. He smiled anyway. The instinct was too deep to suppress. But the smile arrived half a second too late and sat slightly wrong on his face, like a garment that no longer quite fits. She did not smile back. She turned and resumed her conversation with the deputy superintendent. At 8:15, the auction portion of the evening began. A moderator, practiced, elegant, the specific breed of event professional who can make anything sound like an opportunity. guided the room through the first 6 pieces with the choreographed enthusiasm of someone who knows the audience has money and needs to be reminded of that pleasurably. The 7th piece was Preston's. He was introduced. He took the small stage area at the front of the room with the ease of a man who had stood in front of powerful audiences his entire professional life and believed still that the audience was his. He spoke about the painting, about the private collection, about his long-standing commitment to the arts and his gratitude for the opportunity to contribute to this evening's cause. It was polished. It was exactly the kind of speech that rooms like this one received as genuine currency. He was 3 sentences from the end of it when the doors opened. Not dramatically, not in the movie way with a bang and a moment of suspended silence. 2 men in suits entered through the main entrance and 4 more through a secondary door that most people in the room hadn't noticed, and the moderator's expression shifted in the way of someone who has just received information through an earpiece that has altered the evening's plan. Agent Raymond Collier crossed the room at a pace that was not a rush, but was also not a stroll. He had the documentation in his hand. He had 2 colleagues with him. He approached the stage with the manner of someone who has done this before, in better rooms than this, and has learned that the drama is not in the arrival, but in what the arrival contains. "Mr. Hale," Collier said, "I'm going to need you to step down from there." Preston Hale looked at Collier with the expression of a man whose instinct was to argue. She could see it from across the room. The gathering of the social weaponry that had always worked, the preparation of the voice that commanded deference, the particular posture of a man about to manage a situation. Then he looked at the documentation in Collier's hand. And the posture changed, not collapsed. Preston Hale was not someone who collapsed visibly, but it shifted, the way a building shifts in the first moments of a structural failure before the external signs appear. Something interior, something load-bearing, giving way. He stepped down. Collier began the legal language. The notification, the specific enumeration of charges that included art fraud and receiving stolen goods and wire fraud, and the additional charges that Collier had quietly confirmed to Patricia that morning would be attached relating to the shell company and the financial manipulation of the Ellington Foundation. The room around them held a specific charged silence that was not the ballroom silence of 11 days ago. That had been shock. This was something colder and more collective. The silence of people who are watching a man's constructed life dismantle in real time and are recalibrating everything they understood about him. 260 people, journalists with phones. Zuri stood near the side wall and watched Preston Hale's hands get guided behind his back and understood something she had not expected to feel in this moment, which was not triumph. Triumph would have been clean. This was more complicated than that. This was the particular weight of watching someone who had hurt you get what they earned, and discovering that accountability, when it finally arrives, is more solemn than satisfying. Not because it isn't deserved, but because nothing that happened in this room gave her back the 18 months Preston had spent making her doubt herself, and nothing gave Gerald Mwangi back to the 6 years of trust she had built with him, and nothing made the surveillance retroactively not have happened. What remained was what had always been there. The work, the foundation, the 42,000 people, the books. Luciano appeared beside her. She didn't hear him arrive. She never did. He was simply not there, and then there, which was a quality of his she had stopped finding uncanny and had come to accept as characteristic. He said nothing. He stood beside her and watched the room with the expression of someone who has set something in motion and is watching it reach its conclusion and is not performing any reaction about it. She reached over and took his hand, not dramatically, the way you take someone's hand when they're next to you and you want them to know you know they're there. He held it. The formalities took 40 minutes. Statements were given, documentation was collected. The moderator made a professional and almost heroic attempt to salvage the remainder of the evening that failed entirely because no auction can recover from the arrest of a major donor. And by 9:15, the room had mostly dispersed into clusters of people processing what they'd witnessed in the way of people who would be discussing it for months. Zuri spoke to Collier briefly, with Patricia beside her, and confirmed her availability for the following week's meetings. Collier looked at her with the specific respect of someone who has received good documentation from a cooperative witness and is acknowledging it professionally. He thanked her. She thanked him.
It was efficient and unglamorous and felt, in its unglamorousness, like something real. Gerald Mwangi had, as Patricia predicted, cooperated. His attorney had negotiated a reduced charge arrangement in exchange for full testimony against the shell company network, against Preston Hale's financial directives, and against 2 additional parties in the corporate fraud scheme whose names Zuri didn't recognize and didn't need to. Gerald's cooperation had been thorough enough that Collier had told Patricia it was among the cleaner fraud unravelings his team had processed in recent years. Zuri had not spoken to Gerald. She did not know yet whether she would. The legal situation required separation, and she had maintained it. But she had thought about him, in the way you think about people who have betrayed you when you're trying to understand it rather than just survive it. She had thought about the desperation that must have been operating underneath 6 years of apparent reliability. The pressure or the debt or the fear or whatever combination of those had made him say yes to the first transfer. She did not forgive it, but she was trying, in the deliberate way of someone who understands that carrying specific human hatred is a weight she could not afford, to understand it. Understanding and forgiving were different things. She had learned that from her grandmother, who had understood more than she forgave and had lived a long and full life. They left the venue at 9:45. The car moved south through Manhattan, through the tunnel, into Brooklyn, and Zuri watched the borough arrive around her the way it always did, with the particular personality of a place that has no interest in being anyone's romantic idea of itself, that is simply and completely what it is. Take it or leave it. She had never been able to leave it. "Marco," she said. "Handled," Luciano said. "As of this afternoon. He's in Atlantic City, which is where he goes when he needs to think. He understands the terms." "What are the terms?" "That he doesn't touch anything or anyone connected to me or my family, that he steps back from any operational role, that if he accepts those terms, he lives a comfortable and unbothered life in whatever city he chooses. And if he doesn't accept..." "He will," Luciano said. "Marco is impulsive about tactics. He's not impulsive about survival." She looked out the window. "What about the organization? The people inside it who were watching how you handled this week?" "They saw what I needed them to see," he said. "That the threat was identified, neutralized, and that the response was controlled. Nobody I need loyalty from interprets controlled as weak." He paused. "The ones who do are the ones I don't need." "You believe that." "I'm learning to act like I do," he said, "which is maybe the same thing if you do it long enough." She thought about that. There was something honest in it. The admission that belief and practice were sometimes indistinguishable from the outside, that you became what you repeatedly did even if you hadn't fully arrived at certainty yet. She had built an entire foundation on a version of that principle. She understood it. "The foundation," she said. "I need a new executive director." "I told you I know someone." "Send me her information," she said. "I'll decide after I've reviewed it, and I'll be the one to decide." "Of course," he said. "And I want to restructure the financial oversight," she said. "Dual authorization on every transfer above $5,000. External quarterly audit, independent firm, no exceptions." She had been composing this list in her head for 3 days. "I want the board to approve a new financial governance policy by the end of the month." "That sounds right," he said. "It's not your organization," she said, not sharply. "But yes, it sounds right." He almost smiled. It was the particular almost smile she had catalogued over 14 months, the one that appeared when she said something that reorganized his understanding of a situation by about 3 degrees, and he found it, quietly, somewhere between clarifying and delightful. They arrived at Carroll Gardens, the brownstone, the particular block that had become, over 14 months, the closest thing to a shared geography they had. She sat for a moment in the car before getting out. "I want a public wedding," she said. He looked at her. "We're already married." "I know we're already married," she said. "I want a public wedding, not a big one, not a production. But I want to stand somewhere in this city with you and be publicly, unambiguously the 2 people we actually are. And I want the people I love to be there. And I want it to happen before the end of the year." She looked at him.
not to make a statement, not because of this week, because I want it. He was quiet for a moment, then, where? She had thought about this too, not obsessively. She was not a woman who had spent her girlhood planning weddings, but she had thought about it in the specific way of someone who knows what they actually want when they get quiet enough to hear it. Prospect Park, she said. The boathouse. Small. 50 people, maybe 60? Donna will handle the flowers because she's been waiting to handle my flowers since approximately 1999, and I owe her that. The boathouse, he said. You'll tell me it's a security challenge, she said. It's a security challenge, he said. You'll manage it. I'll manage it, he said. They got out of the car. The weeks that followed had the texture of something rebuilding. Not seamlessly, not according to any plan, but with the particular organic stubbornness of things that are alive and intend to remain so. The Ellington Foundation's board convened an emergency session and adopted the new financial governance policy in 11 days. Zuri interviewed 4 candidates for the executive director position, including the woman Luciano had recommended, who was named Adeze Nwosu, and who had, in the first 15 minutes of their interview, identified 3 structural vulnerabilities in the Foundation's grant management process that Zuri had not noticed, which was either a recommendation or a warning, and Zuri decided it was both and hired her. Patricia Osei filed the formal complaint against Gerald Mwangi's actions on behalf of the Foundation, separate from the federal proceedings, and the civil case moved forward with the deliberate, unhurried pace of legal processes that have sufficient evidence and are in no particular rush. The Crown Heights permit came through on a Tuesday, delivered by email with the kind of bureaucratic neutrality that gave no indication of how long it had been withheld or how quickly it had moved once certain social equations had shifted. Zuri printed it out, took it to the library on Nostrand, and put it in the file where it belonged, and did not make any more of it than that. Marco DeLuca settled in Miami, which suited him in ways that Atlantic City had not. He did not make contact with Luciano. He did not test the terms. He was, as Luciano had predicted, ultimately a man who understood survival. Preston Hale was denied bail on the art fraud charge after prosecutors successfully argued flight risk. He spent 18 days in custody before his attorney negotiated a modified arrangement. The case would take years to fully resolve. These cases always did, but the public record of what had happened in that room, in front of those 260 people, was permanent. The construction of Preston Hale as a man of consequence was finished. What remained was the legal process, which was less interesting to the city than the story, and which the city had largely already moved on from, in the way of a city that produces more story than it can hold. The wedding happened on a Saturday in December, 54 people. The Prospect Park boathouse strung with the kind of simple, warm light that Donna had apparently sourced from 4 different vendors after rejecting 12 other options. Zuri wore ivory, not white, ivory, the particular color of something that has a little age in it, and her mother cried before the ceremony started and denied having done so afterward, which was characteristic. Luciano wore a dark suit and looked, for the 107th time in Zuri's experience of him, like a man who was aware that he was in a room where the primary thing required of him was to feel something and had arrived at the decision to simply let himself do that. Donna gave a speech that was 8 minutes long and contained 3 stories that Zuri had specifically requested she not tell, all 3 of which the room received with the laughter of people who were genuinely having a good time rather than performing it. Luciano's speech was 4 sentences. He had told her the night before that he wasn't a man who spoke easily in public about private things, and she had told him 4 sentences was plenty. The 4 sentences he chose were specific and accurate and said nothing about protecting her or keeping her safe or any of the language that the preceding weeks had complicated, and said instead that he intended to spend the rest of his life being the kind of man who deserved to stand next to her in the places she had built, and that he understood this was not a low bar and that he intended to clear it. 54 people in the boathouse heard that and understood it in the way audiences understand things that are simply true without decoration. Zuri did not give a speech. She had written one and read it the night before and decided it was everything she wanted to say and none of what she needed to. What she needed was to stand in the December light in the building her city had built beside the lake her city had made, surrounded by the 54 people who actually knew her, and be present in it. to let herself be exactly where she was without managing it. She did that. Later, weeks later, in January, on a Sunday evening when the light was going early and her grandmother's reading chair was occupied for the first time in months because she had finally moved it from the Nostrand Avenue apartment to the Carroll Gardens brownstone, which meant something she didn't fully put into words but understood. Luciano came into the room with 2 cups of coffee and sat in the chair across from her and said nothing, and she was reading something she had been meaning to read since September, and she read it, and the room was quiet in the way of rooms that hold people who have gotten through something and are on the other side of it, not unchanged but still standing. She looked up once, at a point where the paragraph she was reading had earned a pause. He was watching her with the expression she had learned to recognize over 17 months as his most honest one. Not the controlled operational face, not the careful social performance, just a man sitting in a room where the woman he had chosen was reading and finding that this, of everything his life had contained, was the thing that required the least management and the most gratitude. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she went back to her book. Outside, Brooklyn moved through its Sunday the way it always had and always would, with the unsentimental, inexhaustible, fundamentally decent persistence of a place that had outlasted every prediction made about it, that had absorbed every hardship and argument and reinvention without losing the essential quality of itself. Zuri DeLuca turned the page.